Thanks, Tim, and it's lovely to be here. And oh, I wish I only had 100 churches in the diocese. We have the Diocese of Leeds has 604 churches, 250 church schools, and about 450 clergy properties. So the whole estate is quite large, and I am the half-time environment officer for the diocese. But let me go back to the beginning and tell you a little bit about our journey towards becoming a carbon net zero church.
Let me just tell you a little bit of the journey that we've been on as the Church of England, and more locally within the Diocese of Leeds, on our journey to becoming a net zero church. And this started sometime actually before I was involved, when the Lambeth Conference, the conference of bishops from across the Anglican Communion, gathered in 1988 and set 5 marks of mission for the Church of England. And the 5th of those was to safeguard the integrity of creation. And it's always been a slight frustration that that's number 5. They shouldn't really be numbered. I think they are integral, because it's very hard to do some of the other marks of mission, like teaching the gospel, without including creation care, or meeting needs and social action, which doesn't include the impacts of climate change or biodiversity loss. So those marks of missions have sat there for some time, and gradually safeguarding the integrity of creation has come to the fore. In 2007, the Church of England started a Shrinking the Footprint campaign, and that was a kind of in a way a bit of work that was a sort of prophetic work in the wilderness, and I joined the Dawson Environment Group at that point, and sat through many meetings where I was quite frustrated by the level of conversation that we were having. It seemed that planting a few bulbs in the churchyard was seen as a great success in some churches, whereas I was at that point aware of the impending climate crisis that was really already upon us at that point. And it took some time for that prophetic voice, that small group who were advocating for change, to actually have their voice heard. And that came really in February 2020, when the National Environmental Working Group, which again I am now part of, put forward a motion to General Synod, which is like the Parliament of the Church of England, if you like, the decision-making body. We put forward a motion to set a 2045 net zero target for the Church of England, acknowledging that the Church of England has a huge estate of very difficult to decarbonise buildings. And during that debate, several people spoke, particularly young people spoke very movingly about the need and the urgency to take action, and why, as Christian people, it was imperative that we took action and showed leadership and were a prophetic voice in this space. And an amendment was put that we should be carbon net zero by 2030. And I remember distinctly speaking afterwards to one of the members of General Synod, who said to me, when they had heard somebody standing in opposition to that, speaking about the fact that this was a distraction from the main purpose of the church, which was saving souls, they decided that they would vote for the 2030 amendment. They were so frustrated by the narrow-mindedness of that gospel position. So we ended up with a 2030 carbon net zero target, which for those of us who had put the motion was quite a shock, because, as I say, the challenge of being net zero by that date is enormous. And so to the next part of the story, really, which is where the hard graft started, and how decarbonising the church is an act of love. It's an act of sacrifice, and it is a prophetic stance, speaking to wider society, that we are going on this journey. So my role includes calculating the carbon emissions for the diocese. It's a lovely fun job with a spreadsheet, and we have a carbon footprint as a diocese of about 18,000 tonnes of carbon dioxide from our operations. So as I say, we have church buildings, church halls, cathedrals, clergy properties, church schools, diocesan offices, staff travel, and we also have some land, some glebe land, all of which are on this journey. It involves, as I say, hard work in terms of collecting data, changing policies, but what we found was that having this national decision from the Church of England meant that we could really move much faster and harder. It was a peg to hang all this action on that previously we'd struggled to get much traction for. So a key moment in having that leadership from our decision-making body as a church. And like many have said on this conference before, it's quite difficult to get people on board with this. And again, a light bulb moment for me was when a theologian described this as that climate change and the biodiversity crisis are the context into which we are now preaching the gospel. It is not an issue. It's not something that just a few people can deal with. We are all in this context. And what does the Christian gospel look like in that context? Yes, it was Reverend Ruth Newton, just looking at the chat. So we need to think about what our churches look like and how they can preach the gospel. So I don't know whether I'm running over time, Tim, and could tell you a little bit about a couple of churches. Yep. So just to give you a couple of examples, so we have a fantastic rural church, St John's Sharrow, near Ripon, and they have gone down the Eco Church path. So they have a Silver Eco Church Award. They draw out and emphasize creation care in their worship week by week. It's embedded within their worship, and they see creation care as part of their mission as a church. They've managed their churchyard so that it's very biodiverse. For those in the know, they have a thriving M8 grassland, which is top grade in terms of biodiversity. And they use the churchyard for outreach, because people come through, they walk through because there's a footpath going through. So they engage with people in conversation about nature and God, and they use it for the local school coming in to talk about both the heritage of the churchyard and about creation care. And they are on a journey to decarbonising their heat. So they're looking at whether they can install solar panels and move to an electric heating system so that they can come away from fossil fuels. In contrast, All Hallows is a very inner city urban church in Leeds, and they also have a Silver Eco Church Award. They run a food waste cafe, meeting the needs of local people, as it's pay as you feel cafe, and they've, as a church, have made a statement of divestment from fossil fuels and have moved their finances away from any banks or institutions that invest in fossil fuels. and their care for creation is fully embedded within the life of the church and the mission of the church. I'm going to stop there because I want to allow a bit of time for questions if that's possible. So over to Tim.
You've been admirably brief, Jemima. So if you have any more inspiring examples, please feel free to feed them in. But we'll start the question time, and we've got plenty of time for questions. So do put your hand up or put something into the box. But I've got Michelle first, and then David. If you would like to ask your question, Michelle, that'd be great.
Yeah, so it's about your carbon calculation, Jemima. What period of time was that over?
Oh, so 18,000 tons annually.
Right, and do you count anything that's offsetting those as well, or is it like literally just what's contributing towards it?
Yeah, sorry, I should have said that's a very, very good technical question. That's a net figure. We now have a national carbon calculation tool, which churches have to send data back to the national church anyway, annually through an online parish return. Then we now have something called the energy footprinting tool, which collects energy use data, and in the Diocese of Leeds we've established a renewable electricity tariff scheme. We work with an energy broker, so churches can use that. They can use other people if they wish to, but that's called the Green Journey. It's actually open to any church, so if any of your churches want to use it, they're very welcome to. There are details on our website. It's called the Green Journey, and so if churches are using 100% renewable electricity, they can deduct that from their in our counting. So if that helps. Yeah.
Thank you, Jemima. Could I ask David to put his question?
Yeah, thanks, Jemima. I obviously am from the city of Leeds. I work with the Reverend John Swales, and I think you know is fairly passionate about this stuff. I think he would ask the question, and I guess so would I, in terms of getting to net zero. How much does it include Church of England investments, which I know is quite a big thing, quite a tricky thing. But how much does that include when it comes to kind of working towards net zero?
Yeah, so it's really interesting question about the church investments. So some of you will know the Church of England has a really large pot of investments which are managed by the church commissioners, and those go towards funding some of the life of the church, but also in order to pay for clergy pensions. And the Church of England has, the church commissioners have been leading on something called the TPI, the Transitions Pathway Initiative. So they have been grading all the different investments according to their whether they're on the pathway to net zero, and this has been a major initiative that the whole secular investment movement has come behind. I think they've got it's trillions of pounds now using this transition pathway that the Church of England have been leading on, so that has been a really positive step that as churches on the ground we don't really see, but actually within the investment world the Church of England is really highly regarded for this work that they've been doing. There's been concern from members of the Church of England that those church investments haven't been completely divested from fossil fuels yet, and the Church of England took a pragmatic approach of engagement. So they've held very, very small holdings in a few fossil fuel companies still, in order for them to engage with those fossil fuel companies and to try to, as shareholders, be in shareholders meetings and push those fossil fuel companies towards net zero and the transition. They're really tiny amounts. I can't quote them to you, but they're kind of like less than 1% of the Church of England's investments. They're really, really small, but they've been held on to in order to be able to have this position of speaking into those situations, and that is to be reviewed later this year. So I have to say, compared to many secular bodies, you know, I'm just always amazed at how much the Church of England has done and utilised its investments to affect change.
Thanks, Jemima.
Thanks. That's a very comprehensive answer there to quite a difficult question. Paul, you had a question. Would you like to put yours?
Yeah, it's interesting the thing about the 2020 carbon neutral thing. I'm interested. I've only just discovered that there's a scope 1 and a scope 2 and a scope 3. So presumably that's a scope 1 declaration, is it?
Really good question, Paul. Sorry, I didn't drill down into that because it's, again, this is all the technicalities of carbon footprints. No, it's fine. It's great. It's a great question because it gives me more chance to talk about it. Having declared we were going to get to carbon net zero by 2030, we actually then had to define what that was going to be. Kind of would have been good if we'd done it the other way around, but we didn't. So, you know, we're all learning on this journey. The decision was taken for it to be scope 1 and scope 2 emissions. So just so everyone's clear, scope 1 are where fossil fuels are burnt directly. So that would be your gas heating in your church building or your church school, or oil heating, or petrol or diesel from travel. And we'd also do scope 2, which is where fossil fuels are burnt indirectly. So that's for generating electricity. So that's your church electricity. But we decided not to include scope 3, and that's where fossil fuels are burnt from the supply chain. So that would be, say, the manufacture of paper used in church. It would be the church investments, as David's touched on that. Building materials for church repairs. The emissions from the water used in the church. A whole range of things fall into scope 3. And actually, we just felt that it was challenging enough to start with scope 1 and 2, and I can see that as a church we will move to scope 3 post 2030.
Right, thank you very much. Perhaps I could just put one final question to you, Jemima. I'm struck once again this morning that you've been on this journey as an organisation for decades, and we're very, very late to the party in our work, and it's really only in the last handful of years that many ChristCentral churches have begun to seriously question what we do. I just wonder, from the benefit of that experience, how much effort you still put into convincing people of the need to join us on this journey, or are you content that perhaps with the majority, perhaps a large majority of people who support it with their heads and their hearts, that you just continue anyway and ignore the voices that argue against from within the church? It'd be interesting to know what your experience is in trying to reach out to people still after decades of work.
Yeah, I think thank you, Tim. Good question. I think now the majority are know we have to do something. It's a question of where it sits in terms of people's priorities. And within the Diocese of Leeds, we've set up a structure where we're encouraging every church to have a parish environment officer, so a champion, like we've been talking about on the call before, to lead. It's really encouraging now with our leadership coming through. Ordinands are receiving really good theological training and practical training on this coming through our theological colleges. I have to say that some of that's not necessarily the case with all clergy who've been in post for a long time. We've also embarked on a program of carbon literacy training for our diocesan staff, so that they understand how this fits into their everyday jobs, you know, depending on what their role is. People in the finance team, people in the education department, all sorts of roles for helping them to come on board. So I would say it is a very small minority who are what we might describe as climate deniers, or maybe more climate delayers now. But yeah, there are still those conversations to be had.